Hi, my name is Dylan Richts, and I'm the head of partnerships at WeThinkCode.
Welcome to the African Tech Roundup, Dylan.
Thanks, great to be here.
Congratulations. You're fairly new in this role. You spent some time at MEST and then came over here. Give me a sense of what it is you do here. And for those of us who are pretty fresh to WeThinkCode and what you do here, what WeThinkCode exists to do.
Sure. So I think to explain my role, if we go back a bit into the WeThinkCode story, in 2016, it was set up by Arlene Mulder and Camila Gon. And the thinking behind it was, how do you democratize education, but specifically technical skills? So there's a massive gap in the market. There's a great need for skills, but how do you make it accessible to people who might not necessarily have had the opportunity or the background in IT or coding? And so how do you source those people and then also give them an intensive training experience, which leads directly to employment? And so we run a 2-year-long program, and throughout that, they also take internships in a corporate environment. And the idea is really to prepare them for the skills they need to take up full-time employment. And so my role is really about finding those companies that have said, we have a drastic lack of skills. We're struggling to recruit for these roles because it is very specific, but we're also looking for people who are really full stack developers. There are people who have a wide variety of skills and will fit in really well into our business as well. And so that's kind of where we've, the head of partnerships role came from.
And so when you say our business, are you like Gebeya and Andela, where you are also, I guess, a recruitment agency for firms looking for these skills?
I wouldn't describe ourselves as a recruitment agency. I think one of the things is we are born in the South African context. And so there's an acknowledgement that there is a huge gap in the education system. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to upskill people and find them employment. The corporate elements of that is more that these companies that we work with, and it's important that they want to invest in the future of South Africa. They want to invest in the future of these skills, and they want to help upskill people. Of course, there's a business element for that as well, but we don't do recruitment. We don't do placements. This is a journey which we take with the corporate partners. And so they're involved throughout the process. They come in, they speak to our students, they add value in that way. They provide 2 internship opportunities, which are 4 months each. And the idea is that they are helping shape these young minds, and then at the end of it, hopefully, at their discretion, they will provide an opportunity for full-time employment.
You've alluded to the model. Explain perhaps using one or some of your existing partnerships. What's the resourcing model? Is this for profit? Are you guys an NPO? And how do you go about choosing partners or being chosen by partners?
So we're a not-for-profit company, and that is quite important for us because it's part of our ethos that we are doing good for the country, but also that we want to run commercially. So we are a not-for-profit company, but the skills that we put out at the end, they need to be top-notch. They need to be people who are ultimately employable. And I think that's something that in a partnerships function, you see when partners keep coming back, that's a good sign. And so some of our founding partners are F&B, Derivco, BBD, and then we brought on Telkom and BCX as expansion partners. But overall, we have about 40 partners who span the full range of the corporate environments in South Africa, from banks, development houses, right through to smaller SMEs who are doing amazing things in blockchain or gaming. So because we work with such a wide variety of partners, our model works quite well in terms of the training that we do. And obviously we can go more into that, but it's really about, we build the foundations in the first year, we do some PHP boot camps, etc. But the second year is really, the students have actually experienced an internship in this company. And so they know this company focuses specifically on these tech stacks. They focus specifically on this type of projects. And so the second year is really about creating your own curriculum. So we have 18 modules available to the students, and then they really select the ones that are most relevant to the career path that they want to take. And that might be security or iOS developments or Java developments. And then they dive quite deeply into those. And so it's really so that by the time they come into the second internship and employment, they are ready to work within that organization. But more importantly, they've learned how to learn, because technology changes so quickly that we could teach you this tech language and then tomorrow it's obsolete. So how do we make sure that they're future-proofs tech talent that can work in any environment, really?
And so these companies you work with, do they see this more as CSR on their part, or is it the sort of money they would have spent on HR spend or toward attracting the sort of skills they need as a straight line item, say, in their income statement?
I mean, that's, it's obviously unique to each company, but I think for the most part, they see it as we need tech skills. And so where we traditionally might go to a university and there may be gaps in terms of the practical experience these students have, they're trying new things. And so they come to us because they have very specific talent requirements and they're struggling to find these skills. And so they see this as a great opportunity for them to both develop that pipeline, but also, really get those people into the organization. So it's not really CSR in any way. They're seeing this as an actual opportunity for their business and to fill gaps where there are those within the business.
In trying to make sense of who and what you guys are, and finding a box for you, as it were, there's Andela and Gebeya. Right, perhaps on one side of the continuum. I'd say Andela on the far right. As we move left, you might have Gebeya, which I think leans closer to like the traditional school or educational environment, in addition to being, say, a placement agency or a resource to companies to fulfill their HR needs and profit over the placement of actual people, the ongoing placement or service provision. It sounds to me that you guys are somewhere between Gebeya and like the traditional educational environment. Is that fair to say? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's unfair. I've worked with Gebeya and I've worked with Andela at various points in my career. So I do understand their models quite well. We're different from them.
So break it down for us as someone who's had experience with these firms and appreciating their model. Give us a sense of, what's different about them and how you perhaps aren't quite like that or are unique in your own way.
Sure. I think probably the biggest difference from both of them is that their models both focus very much on finding opportunities to have African tech talent solve problems in developed markets. And so both of them do a lot of their business developments in the US or the UK, and they are looking for companies that are struggling and outsourcing to places like India. And so they're seeing this renaissance in African tech where there are these young people and let's upskill them and then outsource the work. I think for us, the focus has always been we are looking for South African students, for South African companies, and we're going to solve that problem locally for local companies. And in a way, it's because we started, I guess, in Johannesburg, where it is such a massive issue. I mean, Endeavour just released a report that showed the number of tech jobs and the lack of skills associated with those in Joburg is a huge problem. And so we're really looking at the markets that we're in, that we're solving that local need, and we're solving it with local resources. And so how do you reach a young person that's living in Khayelitsha and match them to ultimately to a position that is 15 minutes away from them? And that's the space that we play in. And so our model isn't necessarily conducive to the Andela, let's raise funding and bring returns for investors, because that's not where we play. We are a not-for-profit and we intend to stay that way, but we always focus on quality. And so we want to make sure that we've got all of the skills and services around those students that by the time they go into employment, they are work ready. They're work ready from a technical perspective, but also we've resolved any life or communication skills or soft skills that they don't have. And so that's a massive component of the program and why it takes 2 years, because we're taking people from such a wide variety of backgrounds that you really need to think about the broad set of skills that you need to take into account when going into employment.
But also, what makes you different is once you've done what you can, or you've sort of invested in these young people, it's one up to your, I don't want to call them sponsors, your partners, to determine whether or not they want to absorb these young people into their ranks. And it's really up to the graduates or the alumni of your process to make their way in the world thereafter. And you don't perhaps have the pressure Andela and Gebeya have to sort of keep people loyal, because there's this ongoing need to basically sell their skills. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us that by the time they leave the program that they are well skilled, but there's an acknowledgement as well that we're working with people. And so we give 2 internship opportunities, because that's for the student to understand, is this a company I actually want to work for? And for the company to say, are you a cultural fit? You might be technically amazing, but if you're not a cultural fit, it's not going to last. And so we spend a lot of work in that matching process to, gain excitement from the corporates to come in and speak to the students, and the students put their CVs forward to the ones they want to work with. But that at the end of the first internship, we also say, was that the right fit? And then if it isn't, we do a rematching process. So by the end of it, our hope is that every single student goes into employment. Of course, we say to them, you commit to that sponsor for a year should you get in. But beyond that, you're a person, and we're not going to hold on to you forever. So we've given you the skills. The company then needs to, create an environment in which you want to work in. And I think that's why we see it as really a partnership. So we work very closely with the companies and understand their needs and make sure that we're doing as much as feasibly possible. But, beyond that 2-3 years, that's really for them. And people will move and change their lives. But
what's your success rate?
So from our first cohort, which started in 2016 and graduated this year, we have a 95% placement rate. And that's something that obviously we just want to keep growing year by year. But that's really where we're aiming for. We're aiming for a full placement rate. And if you graduate from the program, we're going to do everything we can to make sure you find an opportunity at the end of it.
I've heard the folks at Andela say, getting into Andela is statistically more difficult than getting into Harvard. I really can't stand it when they go that route. And I understand, listen to me using the American version of route. When they go that route in trying to sort of PR themselves, I know that plays really well in the States where that sort of snobbery is celebrated, frankly, but and perhaps here too, if I'm honest. But how hard is it to get in, and how important is it that people be clawing all over each other to try and get into WeThinkCode?
Look, I mean, it's hard. I'm going to be very honest on that. We really are doing a lot of tests to test for aptitude. So the acceptance rate is relatively low, but that's not something we promote. It's not something that we really care about. If you are well suited to it, we want you here. And so if you get through, our application process is a series of online games. There are 3 games in total. You get a high score, you get invited to a boot camp. The boot camp then is 3.5 weeks long, intensive. It's 7 days a week, eat, sleep, code. And really what we're trying to do there is we're trying to test whether you'll succeed in our environment. Because for us, someone who coming in and then dropping out is not an ideal case. And so while it happens, we want to try to counteract for that as much as possible. But once you're in the program, we really want you to succeed. And so as much as possible, we try to put interventions in place for that. And there are specific interventions we do put in place. But, we're not talking about how competitive it is to get in as much as we're saying, once you're in, we're going to do everything possible to make sure you succeed.
And so I'm aware that you guys have expansion plans for other countries, other markets on the continent. Where to next?
Yeah, so currently we opened in Joburg in 2016. We started in Cape Town at the beginning of this year. And so we have our first cohorts going into internships in February. And then we're starting to examine other markets. The plan for us is that by 2024, we want to be operating in 3 African countries, in 5 cities. And obviously there's a lot of thought that goes into that and making sure the model is scalable. But we're looking across East and West Africa at the moment to make sure that when we do expand, we're doing it for the right reasons, that our model there works and that we continue to grow in a healthy manner, I guess.
Do you expect to exploit the arbitrage opportunity that I sense is possible in intra-Africa terms? I imagine the cost of coding talent in South Africa is not quite what it is, say, in other parts of the continent, or vice versa, right? Are you going Andela on us here?
No, I think, what the thing is, if we move to a new market, we would probably have to tweak the model slightly, if I'm honest. But
so that's a yes. So basically, they're totally looking to get affordable talent plugging into, say, South African companies, or, affordable South African talent, feeding into companies and places where coding talent's a lot more expensive. Am I right?
No, I would say if that company has an operation, I mean, we look at the student first, that students in Lagos, for instance, they don't want to travel to work in Johannesburg, or they can't because of visa reasons. So if we expanded to a new market, we would really start by looking at who are the companies that are going to be that we're going to be working with and partnering with, and what are their tech needs. And so I think we would still take a localized approach wherever we go. We're going to be looking at, does Lagos have enough opportunity to support the students that we're putting out? And if not, then that's not the right market for us. So we're different in that we don't want to take you from Lagos or from Accra and send you somewhere else across the continent. We want you to work in that environment, in the city that you live in. What you choose to do 5-10 years after that, that's up to you.
You're probably aware, given that you've worked with Gebeya and Andela, the fact that there's been criticism that their models essentially create a brain drain effect that takes the very best we have on the continent to feed into what's already working just fine elsewhere. Granted, there's the shortage of good talent anywhere in the world, but certainly not more so than right here. And so, are you sensitive to that notion? I've had people from Andela on the show, of course, vehemently denying that they're contributing to any so-called brain drain. Are you sensitive to that? Is that in part why your model is what it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think, our students, when they graduate, they go into a local company at the starting salary that someone else would go into in that company. And so we are cognizant of it. And I think Andela and Gebeya Talent, they have their models, and their models work well, and they're solving very specific issues, and in the same way that we are. So, we're more locally focused, and that in times is intensive. It makes it a little bit more difficult. You have to actually understand the partners that you're working with and their needs, and our curriculum adapts accordingly. And so I don't think it's necessarily something to criticize about them. They saw an opportunity and they're doing very well because of it, but it's not really where we play. So we are cognizant that local people getting upskilled into local companies is what the ecosystem needs in all of these cities across the continent.
Do you guys take on grant funds?
We're looking at all sorts of opportunities. We are looking at having certain portions of the curriculum grant funded because as we grow and as we learn, there are elements that we want to incorporate into it. And a nice way to do that is to work alongside organizations which not only have the funding, but also have experience in some of the things that we're going through. If you look at life skills, for instance, there are lots of organizations which focus specifically on that. And so, having a partner that can work alongside us with that is definitely something that we're looking at.
I ask because there's a debate that the development agenda within Africa's tech and innovation scene is being shaped by and large by, institutions and organizations that, one, aren't necessarily invested, and I say that carefully, aren't necessarily invested in outcomes over the long term right here on the continent. And they've got theses and, concept notes that are quite divorced from, our long-term sustainability and well-being here on the continent. And, the politics of that is actually doing more to shape, quote unquote, what Africa needs next. And so I guess I ask the question because I wonder who sets that agenda here, and if you guys have ever had to grapple with potential grant funders or existing partners trying to shape your thinking around what you should be doing.
Of course, I think we are very aware that there are motivations behind everything. And so the founders very early on said, this is our DNA. And obviously the program adapts and different things happen, but we are very much about democratizing education to allow anyone between the ages of 17 and 35 to enter the program, irrespective of economic or socioeconomic backgrounds or educational levels, and then we partner with industry, and partnering with industry it's a back and forth, and obviously everyone has their motivations, and we as much as we can without changing who we are, we do try to accommodate for that. But I think we're also very aware that if a partner comes to us and says, this is what I want, and it's a significant change to how we operate, that doesn't work not only for us, but it doesn't work for the other partners that we're working with. And so we're very clear up front about this is who we are. We're developing exceptional talents that are going to join your company. But yes, our year runs in a certain way, and where we can, we would love to incorporate more of what the partners are doing. But I really think that it's important that we know who we are and that we focus on doing what we do well.
Okay, and I'm not trying to sensationalize the imagined competition that might exist between, say, Gebeya and Andela and, say, you guys or whatever, because the addressable opportunity is so massive. And frankly, we need several a couple dozen of you guys doing what you do to meet the need, and I think still there'd be space. At least I'd like to imagine. But I do think if I imagine being in the boardroom of somewhere like Andela, and there's sort of like a quadrant on the whiteboard, and they're trying to sort of plot, who's who. Is this like a potential partner? Is this like an out and out competitor? Like who, and they're trying to figure you guys out. In your mind, where do you think you might place in that sort of discussion or deliberation at a place like Andela? Is it plausible that perhaps one day, there might be a collaboration that involves you guys both, or that there might be aspects of your model you tweak and that puts you head to head with them in some way, or, give me a sense.
We're looking at crystal balls. For us, I think it's complementary. We see them not as competitors. I think Andela has done a lot of work at saying this is an actual problem that we are facing across the continent. This is how we're going to resolve it. And we're saying we're going to resolve it in this way. But I mean, like you say, there are a lot of organizations that are playing in the space. And to be honest, we could triple, quadruple in size and still not even address a tiny portion of that. But I think increasingly, and specifically because we operate primarily in South Africa at the moment, we work with other schools that are not exactly the same. None of us have exactly the same model, but we work on together on issues that we're facing. And a lot of that is, and the South African context is very specific on this, but how do you take into account the fact that we have massive disparities in wealth, and we have a need for social change? We're addressing that in a very specific way. And how do you put that to a government which is trying to find the best way to support this, but often are under-resourced or not necessarily catching up as quickly? And so how do you engage as a group with government and say, these are the challenges that we're facing, and this is the support that we would like to get from you. What is it that you want from us? And so we don't really see them as competitors as much as how do we work together to change the landscape, and how do we work together to make sure that as a group we are putting out the very best that we can.
So yeah, I mean, give me a sense of, picking up on something you said, like give me a sense of whether or not it's part of your filter to ensure that there's a certain level of representativity in the people that end up in your program. Is it, for instance, important to you guys that, I walk into your offices and I see a sort of demographic representation of what's reflected, in our population, for instance? And if so, how do you, given the sort of disparities you've described, ensure that without, I suppose, turning it into some sort of charity work that frustrates your model because you have to keep up standards, or also just makes it something impossible to access for people who come from advantaged groups or previously advantaged groups?
No, I mean, it's an excellent question. So, I mean, there are multiple strategies on this, and I think the one thing is we don't socially engineer the cohorts. We want them to reflect the South African demographic, and to this point, they have. And the way that we do that is not by saying to anyone, you cannot apply or participate in the program because you are such and such. What instead we do is we go to the areas that are underrepresented in the economy, and we go speak at schools in places like Khayelitsha and Langa, and to students who might not be on Twitter. And obviously we do a lot of social media stuff, but they might not be there and they might not have access to it, and also they might not even have access to the computers that the tests take place on. And so we say to them, book a slot, come onto campus, and you can do the testing on our campus. And so as much as possible we try to put it in interventions in that manner. The other big area, and it's something that's a huge focus for us at the moment, is that women are underrepresented in this industry. No one denies that. And, every year we're showing growth in that, and that's because of specific interventions. And so we've increased the number of women. At the moment, it's 15.6% of the cohort. By 2024, we would like it to be 40% a year. And that's not saying that if you're a woman, you're going to get into the program easier. It's saying we're going to go speak at more all-girls schools. We're going to go speak at places where, women have shown an interest in tech and that they might want to join the program. And then within the program, and specifically because that's where the drop-off sometimes happens, within the boot camps, we're going to put in a support group. And so we've started a new initiative called WeThinkCode's, and it's getting high-level women from across the tech industry, both to amplify the message to their audiences, but also to act as aspirational figures, because that is a big thing that just isn't. It's not visible enough how many amazing women there are in the industry and what they're doing, and getting them to mentor these young women and say, what are the struggles that you're facing specifically, and how can I help you overcome that? And so the Women Think Code initiative is really a big focus for us at the moment, and that's going to increase the numbers of women that we're getting into the program.
So let's talk about the challenges of scaling, because to my mind, the scaling part, where you're going to another country and where you want to keep your values, it means you have to basically replicate everything that's working in Cape Town and Joburg, which is a really expensive, intensive process. How do you do that? And how do you do that sustainably? That is my question, basically.
Very intentionally, I think we were taking a stepped approach to scale. So we step, we plateau, we perfect, we step again. And I think it's the right way to do it, because we've grown from Joburg, we've grown to Cape Town. We know what's working, what's easily replicable.
Sorry, and how many per campus?
So in Joburg, we have 200 in first year, and we have 150 in second year. And in Cape Town, we have just over 100 in first year. So this is our first year in Cape Town, and so we'll be bringing on some new students next year on both campuses. So the stepped approach really says that these are the things that we can automate. These are the things that we can, roll out easily across campuses, and these are the things which are high intensity. So whether that's human resources and finding the right people with the right values that believe in the mission, those are things that no matter what market we're going to go to, we're going to have to do. We're going to have to look at very carefully. But there are certain elements of the program, because it's, our model is peer-to-peer learning. So the students, we don't have lecturers, we don't have teachers. The students teach themselves and they teach each other. And so they're learning to learn. And so it does make it easier for us to scale the program. But there's obviously a lot of thought processes into what is the infrastructure around that? Who are the companies that we're going to be working with? Where are these people going to be employed afterwards?
And the quality control, I imagine, when you're teaching yourself, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's why we have an intensive process. It's not to have that Harvard style. It's literally to test, do you have the aptitude? Number one, do you have the motivation, the self-motivation to come into a program like ours and really succeed? Because, we run it as a work environment. You're expected to be 40 hours a week, but you are ultimately still responsible for yourself. And so we put in communications workshops and all of that to upskill your soft skills. But you're not going to succeed unless you're motivated. And so the boot camps and the testing are really looking for that aptitude. That's what we're trying to test for. And obviously there's going to be localization on those as well. And our entire strategy for finding students is going to be in partnership with organizations that are already doing amazing things there. So, we are looking into it across the markets that we're exploring. But there's an acknowledgement that as long as we keep the core set of values, there can be some localization, because if the market opportunity in Rwanda or Kenya or these different markets is different, then maybe we need to tweak the way that we work, because we're really focused on getting young people, upskilling them, and getting them into employment. And if that looks different somewhere else, then that's something we need to take into consideration. There's no point just cutting and pasting it because it works in Cape Town, which is obviously a very different city to a Kigali or an Accra. So we are cognizant that there's going to be change, and we're just looking at what that might be.
So the last question I'd like to ask you is, I hope you don't give me a biased response just because you work here. And I'd like to think if I'd asked you this question when you worked at MEST, the answer might have been different. But I hope you give me a truly honest response to factor into this debate around, where do you think the intervention is needed most around bringing our ecosystem up to speed in terms of the skills it needs to compete on the global platform? What do you reckon should be the biggest focus right now in terms of this? Also bearing in mind, for those who aren't aware, you have to be 17 years old to get into WeThinkCode. I think no older than?
35.
17 to 35 years of age. Frankly, that's all you need. Have an age that is between 17 and 35, nothing else, no degrees, no prior experience necessarily, although it can be an advantage, I believe. But so give me a sense.
I think obviously you know this much better. You've spoken to people across the continent. There's so many opinions on this. I think there's space for all of it. I honestly believe that what MEST is doing is unbelievable. They're creating founders. They're giving people this opportunity to create companies, and that appeals to a certain type of person. We are upskilling them at a level that they can work in an organization at a very, very deep technical skill. So we're creating those soft skills as well as those really deep technical skills. Harambee, for instance, are looking at work placements across the board. There are organizations that are doing amazing things. I think the biggest gap is that there's not enough collaboration. So there's opportunities for all of these organizations to be better integrated. In an ideal situation, this would be a much earlier intervention. I think that in South Africa in particular, the biggest gap is that not enough kids experience code. And obviously, I come from a very privileged background. I went to a good school that did offer IT, but it offered it in a very obtuse way. So we don't spend enough time actually saying, this is a prospective career path for you. These are the exciting opportunities. We go, this is how you code, and it's all kind of boring and daunting as a young person. It's really about how do we integrate that aspiration into the schooling system. And so I think it really, if I had to say where to start, I would say start there.
Dylan Richts of WeThinkCode, thank you so much for being on the African Tech Roundup, man.
Thanks so much for having me here.